Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of the program. It's Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with Phil and myself. And on the docket this week is common housing questions. Let me say that again. On the docket this week is common housing questions for retirees. The market has been on fire for a couple of years now. Well, at least a good year and a half. It's been cooling a little bit.
Starting to cool down a little bit, yeah.
Cooling a little bit. And then the Fed conversation about ticking up rates is starting to change that dynamic a little bit. So we're going to get into that this week. What's going on, my friend? How you doing?
Doing great. Loving spring.
Yeah.
I think we're finally starting to get there.
Are you getting questions about housing? Do you get some
all the time?
All the time?
Yeah, I mean, and it's something that generally is part of every plan. I mean, most of the clients I work with, it comes up in some fashion.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking about, do I downsize? Do I move? Move into another state? Should I pay off the mortgage? Should I not? Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of factors in that housing discussion. So,
well, I mean, a lot of times we think about it, it's maybe the biggest asset, although sometimes there's things you might be surprised to find out that there's other things that are bigger assets. But anyway, the general rule of thumb is we kind of feel like it's the biggest thing we'll ever own or do management wise from a housing. So it's really important, obviously. And there's a lot of financial questions that go into it as we get older. So it's no surprise that it's going to take up, to your point, that it comes up a lot in the planning conversation. So on this episode, let's talk about a few things, Phil. I've got a couple here on the list. With interest rates still being pretty low, we're still getting
starting to tick up. But
we're still getting the emails. People are probably getting the calls or the emails saying, "Hey, it's a great time to refi." What's your thoughts? Is it should we be paying it off as quickly as possible, or just pay as little as possible to, I guess, since the rates are so low, just make that basic payment?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to it. This is a discussion that comes up very often in planning. I mean, the general thought always has been in retirement, well, I want to have the house paid off before I retire, sure, or as soon as I can after retirement. It really depends, I mean, with that, the advantage obviously is, well, if I don't have a house payment, I don't need as much income. And that's absolutely true.
Sure.
But the flip side of that is understanding how a house works. And, the equity you have in the house, the difference between the value and what you owe the bank on the mortgage, your equity, that doesn't grow in value or doesn't gain interest or growth. The growth that happens or decline that happens in value is based on the house, not the equity. It's just how much of that is yours after you sell it. So really, to me, there's not a lot of advantage in having equity because you can't use it. It's not like you can spend it, unless we get into a reverse mortgage, and that's a whole other discussion we maybe touch on later. But or you go get a home equity loan and borrow from it. But other than that, it's not, you don't have a checkbook. You can't write a check against the equity in the house unless there is that equity line. So
you can't reach into the wall and pull out cash,
Yeah. It really, to me, when I talk about housing, there's, I call the head rule and the tummy rule, right? So the head rule, the math, I can run the math behind it. Generally in a lower interest rate environment, the math says, don't pay it off, have a comfortable mortgage payment that fits into your budget and your spending, and then as long as interest rates are reasonable, then you're better off long-term with that because you've got cash then available, that you can use for other things if you need it. If you've used this cash and paid off the house and later on need it, well, it's very difficult now to get that cash back.
Well, then you're house rich and cash poor. So as a saying,
right. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, I have some clients that we go through the discussion and the math says, yeah, you really shouldn't do it. But if at the end of the day, it's just something you want to do and it keeps you up at night knowing I've got the mortgage payment, you'd rather have it paid off, then let's get it paid off. Let's figure out how to do that. Sure. That's the tummy rule, right? So at the end of the day, that's the one really that governs. To me, you've got to understand the math, make an informed decision. But if you're comfortable paying it off, then let's get it figured out what's the best way to do that.
No, exactly. Because if, for some people, it's just that's going to be the overriding rule, which is why it's such a big deal. Definitely talk with a professional, run the math, run the numbers, get the logic behind it. And then it makes it a little easier to make the, the tummy or the head rule there. Okay. So the other conversation that tends to come up when you get close to retirement is, it's time to is it time to move down to a smaller house?
Yep.
especially if you've raised a bigger family, right? So if you had 3 or 4 kids, you probably don't need all that space anymore. But the
Yeah.
current market that we're in, Phil, makes that a little wonky because you may be paying, you may get
It
more for the
does.
place, but you may be paying more for the new place too.
To your point, yeah, today's market, it can be really tricky for a
Yeah.
lot of reasons because, yeah, you're getting more, but you're paying more, so
Right.
that's kind of an offset. The real catch to me in all of this is, I mean, you can downsize from a size, but you're probably not downsizing much in cost. But the real trick is going to be the property tax, at least here in Michigan, because what
True.
ends up happening is if you've owned your current home for 20, 30 years, well, your property tax is capped, that tax base, it can only go up by a certain percentage each year.
Mm-hmm.
So when you sell and now buy, everything gets reset. So now the tax base is set at what you pay. So all of a sudden you can have a smaller house, even if it's less expensive, and all of a sudden be paying significantly more property taxes because of that.
Yeah.
Just again, run the math,
That
understand pros and cons, how does it work, and know that before you jump into it, because that's the surprise, unfortunately, that I've seen some people get into, and if they haven't had a good real estate agent that walks them through, well, here's the property taxes. Don't look at what the people are paying because that's irrelevant.
Right.
Because it's based on their length in the house and what their tax base is. What will you pay when you buy it?
How does that factor in, Phil, if you want to think about downsizing to something like a condo or a townhome versus an actual home where maybe you don't have maintenance and all those kinds of things, or maybe it's even in another state?
Yeah. So, I mean, another state, you get into the whole same discussion there. Now you got the move. Condo versus owning the house. Yeah, you don't have maintenance. You don't have to, hire the lawn guy and do the,
Right.
Snow plowing and, the major outside things. Typically that's part of the condo. But the flip side there is you got a maintenance fee. It's not free, so.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
You have to build in what is that maintenance fee for the condo. And those can be really tricky
Okay.
because you have no say what that number is.
Right. Kind of like an HOA.
HOA, but a lot more because they cover more, right?
Yeah,
they're covering all that structure typically on a condo. So the outside is the condo's responsibility, the association's responsibility. Yeah, so just be careful in those condo associations to understand what that HOA is, what has it been, and know that that's the risk you're taking there is that covers the maintenance. It's not free. So
well, and for the snowbirds, that's typically the conversation that comes up. You want to sell the house,
Right.
you want to move to Florida, whatever the case might be. So just
do you
definitely
want
bear
two
that in
houses? Do you want to just rent? I mean,
Yeah, that's true too,
again,
yeah.
I mean, that's a discussion we have a lot of clients is, I understand you want to go sell for the, 3 months of the year, whatever it is,
Right.
but is it really worth owning a house? You've got property taxes and insurance and all the maintenance, everything that goes with it. That's going to sit vacant for 9 months. Or you can try to rent it, but then you got to deal with the rental side of it.
Yeah, that can
You wanna
that can
just-
be a headache. Yeah.
Find a place you like and rent. You got to run the math and pros and cons. How long are you going to do it?
You mentioned equity earlier, and I should have asked you when you did that. But using the equity, is it a good idea to pull that out for the major purchases sometimes if need be? Or again, is that emergency fund conversation, or should we just be budgeting for that? Whether it's like the remodel the kitchen or whatever to make life easier as we age or whatever.
Right. Again, you have to run the math in your scenario to see. I mean, I always encourage, even if the house is paid off, have a home equity loan on it or a line of credit on it.
Okay.
Because it's a good emergency fund, rather than having 100,000 sitting in the bank earning 0.00001. Or if you have a home equity, well, then it's not really costing you anything except for maybe a small annual maintenance fee to have it. And you only pay if you use it, so it makes it easier to manage that need for cash in an emergency of whatever it is,
Okay.
So,
So
what's your story on that?
So I went on to open a savings account at my bank the other day. Just did it online. I won't say who it is, but anyway, so went online and I'm just going to open a separate savings account to start saving something for a specific item I want to do later on.
Mhm.
And so on the website, it has the 2 items and it says, click here for, use this one if you'd like to just start with the basic at $25 or whatever. And then the
Right.
next one on the other side, it says, click this one for higher yield, better, more return. $10,000 is the minimum to open
Sure.
that savings account, but you get a better rate, right? That's the big, bold, shiny,
Oh, yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
click, and then of course it's click here for more details, right? It's really small. So I thought, well, you know what? Let me just look and see what the difference is since I talk about this stuff. So I clicked it, and what do you think the earnings rate on the savings account was from the $25 basic one to the high dollar $10,000 one? What do you think the difference was?
Maybe a hundredth or a thousandth of a percent different. I mean, it can't be much different.
Based on what it showed on the website, no difference.
Oh, really? It wouldn't surprise me.
0.01 for both of them.
Okay.
0.01.
Yeah, so big shiny up front. Oh, we're going to pay you more, but the reality is not.
But the reality is, right, yeah. And we've done a show on that in the past about checking the fine print, you know, the sales brochures and shiny objects and stuff like that. But it's kind of goes to serve because the idea is that you're just going to see it and go, oh, cool, I'll do that.
I want the higher interest rate one. Yeah.
Yeah. So you always got to check to make sure it's the right thing for you because there was no difference. And if it was, it was like, it was past the 0.01 number, right? So they didn't even bother to put it on there. So if you put $10,000 in there, you're getting 10 cents, right? I mean, what is that? 10 cents a month, right?
It's absurd.
It's absurd where we're at. So anyway, we're back to the housing thing. I digress for a second, but sliding the house over to the kids, that we've gotten several emails on that and different times things where we go, well, I'm a little worried about a medical condition or whatever the case is. So let me just sign it over to them. But there's some things to be careful here.
Yeah, you've got to be really careful putting the kids actually on the house. And again, so I'm not an attorney. Put that disclaimer out there up front. Talk with your attorney on this, but not something I'd recommend because by them being on your house, now your house is subject to all their risk. You know, so for instance, they get into financial hardship and you know borrow a bunch of money on a credit card and can't pay it and go bankrupt. Well, your house is one of their assets.
Car accident,
their name's on it.
Whatever.
They get into a car accident, right, and get sued. Their house is one of your assets. So you got to be really careful of what you're getting into. There's a better approach to that. If you're worried about you go into Medicaid and the state's paying for your care and them taking the house, at least again, in Michigan, the way it works is they can't take the house, right? You're allowed to have a house, a car, and I think $4,000 in the bank or investments of some sort. Yeah. You know, so that's kind of if you hit that level, then Medicaid would pay. But at the end of it, if you pass away, Medicaid's going to put a claim against your estate and try to recoup that. So one of the ways around that, if that's your concern, is in Michigan, at least we have what's called a ladybird deed, which think of it almost like a beneficiary designation on the deed that during your lifetime, it's you and a spouse, but then there's this beneficiary option that kind of springs up when both of you pass. So that house never goes through your estate. It automatically then goes directly to the kids. So, I mean, if that's your main concern, again, talk it over with your estate planning attorney. But a lot of times that's the better option because now you're not subjecting your house to their risk. They don't have ownership at this stage.
And also there's in a lot of places, Phil, every state's probably, maybe it's different. I don't know if it's a federal thing or not, but there's that 5-year look back.
Yeah. All states have some kind of a look back. Like in Michigan, I think it's still the 5 years that if you give everything away, you know, you got to make it 5 years. Otherwise the state can go claw back, they call it.
And they basically have done that for that reason. You get diagnosed with something and you think, and so you sign it over to the kid. And then within 2 years, you're, depleted in a nursing home. Right. Yeah. They had to protect themselves a little bit. So they've got this 5-year look back. So bear that in mind as well.
Yep.
Okay. Let's do one more here. We'll wrap it up. And that is reverse mortgages, since you mentioned it. I mean, good idea, bad idea. So I'll toss out a scenario just to kind of help people think about it for a second. So my daughter, we have one child, so we're not going to have an argument over who gets what because we just have the one. Right. And she's in the Navy and she's doing her thing and she's has a good career. She may not want the house. So if she comes to me and says, I have no interest in the home, I'm not going to want to live. I'm never coming back there. I don't want to live there. Does it make sense for something like that? Because I have no one else to leave it to. We have no one else to leave it to. So there could be instances where a reverse mortgage could make sense, but you really need to think this through, right?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's like with any financial tool or thing, understand pros and cons. I mean, there's a lot of bad rap out there about reverse mortgages. And back in the day, I mean, they were not a good deal. I mean, it used to be a thing where, you're basically signing over the house and they're paying you a monthly income or whatever it is. And, you died early. Well, they get the house, that's not a good deal because, lost or your heirs have lost the house, and maybe you didn't get really all the equity out.
Right.
They're much more regulated today, and to me, they can be a really good option. They're a great financial tool if they're used the right way, because it is truly a mortgage. So if you passed away with a reverse mortgage on the house, the mortgage company can't take the house. They've got an obligation that needs to be paid. So if your heirs want it, well, they're going to have to refinance the house to pay off that reverse mortgage. Right. So that then it's theirs, or it gets sold and that gets paid off and whatever's left goes to the heirs. So you're not losing the house from that standpoint. But back to kind of our initial discussion of that equity in the home, a reverse mortgage is a way for you to gain access to that. Can be a really good option in a lot of scenarios. We could do a whole show on reverse mortgages, maybe we should, and cons and how it works.
Yeah, well, maybe we should, because I had a gentleman talking to me about that the other day, and he was like, he was in a similar boat. He's like, I don't have any kids. He's like, this is going to be a great way for me to additionally fund my retirement by using that reverse mortgage, because when I pass, they can have it, right, in that particular situation, because then they'll sell it to get their money back. That's typically how it works in that scenario, right?
Yeah, if you pass away and in your estate, there's that house with a reverse mortgage. Yeah, your heirs or whoever the executor of the estate is going to sell the house. If no one wants it, if they're not going to refinance it and pay the mortgage off, they'll sell it, pay off the mortgage, and whatever left goes into the estate. So it's a way of you spending that equity. And it doesn't have to be a monthly income. It can be. You can structure it many ways. You can have it set up as a monthly income. You can have it set up as an equity line. So it's like a home equity, but the advantage to a reverse mortgage is that there's never a payment due. And that's the reverse, right? So if you have an equity line of credit on the house, you at a minimum have to pay the interest. And at some point, that equity line is going to come due and you have to pay the principal back. In a reverse mortgage, there's never a payment due. Right. Now, it doesn't mean the bank isn't charging interest. It's accumulating.
Right. It's building.
Right. So you're compounding that interest rate interest inside the mortgage. So they're going to get their payment at the end when the house is sold. So that's the difference, is it's a way of using that equity and not having to pay it back. Yeah. So again, there's pros and cons to it. It can be a really good financial tool. The trick you have to be careful with it is, unlike a mortgage, it's going to cost more to have one. So you don't want to have this on a house that you're not going to own long term. If you're only going to be in the house for 5 years, don't do a reverse mortgage, because the cost benefit is just not going to work. This is like you say, this is my I'm living here forever.
Yeah. I'm dying here. Yeah.
Now I can recoup some of that equity out of the house to use for other things, and it'll all get reconciled in the end when you pass, because the mortgage company will get paid back. So
gotcha. Yeah.
So anyway, just understand how they work. It's a great tool. So.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. Maybe we'll do a more in-depth show on one later, because there's a lot of little nuances there. We can kind of do some more stuff on it. So again, common questions for housing, around housing for retirees. Downsizing is the big one. How do I, do some equities? The reverse mortgage conversation we just had. Should I pay it off now, pay it off later? Those are the biggies that always pop up. So hopefully that helped you out a little bit. As always, when it comes to big decisions, make sure you're talking with your financial professional before you take any action. You can get information from us. You can learn some things. You can get some points of view. We're talking in generalities. We're trying to share information. You can listen to 20 other podcasts, but then take that information and sit down with a professional, face to face before you take any action. And if you need help, reach out to Phil. He's happy to do so. You can talk to him on the phone. You can do the virtual thing if you're not in the Michigan area, or if you're not in, in the area where he's at. He's got clients all over the country. Yep. So feel free to reach out to him at philstaxhacks.com, or just call him at 248-888-7530. Phil, thanks for hanging out this week, my friend. I appreciate you as always. We'll get into some more stuff next week here on the program.
Sounds good.
We appreciate you. We'll catch you later on the show, folks. Thanks.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.